it's fair to say that it's not rosy out there, I think is quite fair to say. Just to give people an idea of where we are economically before I drill down into the city, because they are linked. The last quarter we were talking about 20% contraction in the economy, that's 17% down from pre-pandemic. Cost pressures that came out in the poll just a minute ago do chime quite closely with our surveys. Firms are facing huge fixed costs, property, labour, insurance, and it's particularly painful in some sectors. So I think we know that about 80% of manufacturers are still below capacity on very similar overheads to what they were before the pandemic. So there's a real cost pressure there. The JRS, which London has used quite considerably among some sectors, has saved upwards of 10 million jobs, but that's going to tail off at the end of October. So we're looking at, in our discussions with the Treasury and other policymakers at the moment, whether or not we can transition that to some kind of sectoral support, but it obviously costs a lot of money. So there is some pushback on that. So, I mean, if you combine all of that, it's quite clear that there was always going to be a difficult trading environment. London has its own distinct set of challenges. So I think London is projected to be about 19 or 20% down in terms of GVA by the end of the year. So that there is a clear correlation between the economic performance of the UK and the economic performance of London. And our economy in London, as Chris alluded to, is really quite interconnected. So we rely quite heavily on the fact that service sectors service other service sectors. And many people in professional business services can work from home. So a lot of that economic activity is happening, but it's not happening in zone one as it was before. But all of the tertiary economy around those firms can't work from home. So those consumer services that people take up when they go into the office cannot happen, which is one of the key drivers as to why the CBI has been weighing into the back to office debate. It's also worth saying that a lot of the people who work in that tertiary economy are disproportionately the lowest paid in the economy. So we're already looking at kind of widespread job losses potentially when the JRS tails off later in the year. So having an eye on those interconnected sectors is really, really quite important. But I guess in terms of the recovery, which is our kind of job now to look at how London can kind of recover itself, there are a few enablers, I think, for the city that we need to have kind of front and centre of our mind. We have a major reliance on the transport network. It's a fantastic integrated transport network, but most major Zone 1 employers rely quite heavily on getting their staff there via the tube and the overground network. TfL ridership was down by about 90% in May. Their fare box plummeted, so they were quite close to collapse. A long-term funding settlement is going to be critical to make sure that people can physically get into the office. We have a world-renowned university sector, which relies quite heavily on overseas confidence for people to come here and study. That is also under threat. Financially, councils have deficits of several billion that they've seen over several years now, and they haven't been getting any better. So the ability at borough level to do kind of business engagement and reach out work is kind of hampered. And as Chris alluded to again, consumer behaviour shifting could really affect the fabric of Zone 1, which leads me to my point on sectors. We have a sectoral reliance on some of the heaviest hit sectors in the country. So retail and hospitality, fashion, the creative industries, and one that keeps getting overlooked in some conversations is the impact of aviation in our airport hubs on kind of bringing freight in and out of the city. So all of these are kind of looking to be tackled by the Mayor and the Treasury, and we're working quite closely with those people on practically what are the levers at kind of local government and national government level to help firms kind of navigate some of this impact. But I guess we would be remiss in not discussing the dreaded B word, which is going to come around again quite quickly. And it's fair to say that we are still campaigning for a deal. Any form of deal is better than no deal. London has a heavy reliance on, obviously, professional financial services that have a heavy reliance on trade with the European Union. So avoiding that cliff edge at the end of December is critical. There are quite a lot of firms who've done a lot of no-deal planning. We've launched a transition hub to help firms, but there are going to be extra costs for a lot of firms. So those cost pressures that came out in the poll a minute ago are probably not going to get better as a result of Brexit, but there is no surprise there. And then finally, I'd just say in terms of services in London, in the last survey we did in August, volumes of activity, profitability, and investment confidence were all falling across service sectors, but specifically in-person consumer services, again, like I mentioned before. And it's worth saying that in our survey from August, professional and business services employment rate dropped at the fastest rate since 2009. So there have been some elements, social media, tech, consulting, that have seen some green shoots throughout the pandemic. But by and large, we're looking at volumes and employment levels dipping, which as we go into the autumn is really something to watch out for. So I'll leave it there. So just not to depress everyone entirely, but there are some key enablers for growth. Forgive me, for London that I think we should keep an eye on. And that's not before talking about mass testing, but that's a discussion perhaps for another day.